What's good, everyone? VenomousStare back with Terran vs. Zerg ladder replay analysis, and today I'm going to be talking about how to use Lurker styles. This is going to be back-to-back ladder games I played. The first game I go Lurker and my opponent I don't think really suspects it, and you'll see what I mean as we march on into the game. And then in the second game he's very wary of my Lurkers, kind of starts to counter against it, and I talk in general about how to use Lurkers, and I want to give a lot of newbie tips as I do this commentary to help the new guy, because StarCraft is a game with a very high barrier to entry. And even if you're Gold League and think you're decent at the game, you have tons to improve upon. Even if you're Diamond League, you have a lot to improve upon. So let's talk about Terran vs. Zerg right after we talk about my live stream. If you like my StarCraft videos, go to twitch.tv/VenomousStare, link will be in the description. I'm streaming some StarCraft here and there. And if you subscribe to this YouTube for StarCraft videos, you definitely want to follow me on Twitch, so when I turn on the live stream, you will be able to see it. So, Terran vs. Zerg, you almost always want to go hatchery first on 17, and then make a drone or two. The thing about droning after you make your hatchery here at 17 is there's always a question of one or two. Now, in general, you always want to do at least one, because if you make a hatch on 17, you're going to go down to 16 supply. You don't want to be in a situation where you're making so many buildings at once where you're really cutting your economy. So I like to make one or two drones, then the gas, and then as soon as the gas finishes, start mining it. And once we get to about 17 supply, 18 supply, we want to build our pool. Now this is important because if we do the build correctly, we will have 100 gas right as the pool finishes, or thereabouts, meaning we'll be able to start Ling speed almost instantly, as well as 2 queens. Now this is all quintessential when playing against Terran. Almost always Terran will go Reaper expand, so the way that you counter that as Zerg is you do the build that I just talked about that lets you get 2 queens and Ling speed right as the pool finishes, and then you need to make 6 Lings. Now, it does suck as Zerg to have to make these 6 Lings early on because it cuts into your economy, but the Reaper will just run you around in circles because it will almost always hit before the queens finish. The only exception, of course, being if you're on some sort of fast 4-player map and the guy has to scout the wrong position. But most of the maps in this ladder pool are 2-player, and a lot of times your Terran opponent's going to be able to find you quickly, and boom, he loses the Reaper. So that's abnormal. That's not supposed to happen as Terran, because the Reaper's fast, and really as Zerg you have no right catching it before Ling speed. But it does happen, you know, shit happens. Terran players like to go back to their base and build buildings. So what do you do if that happens as Zerg? Almost always the Terran will have made either a reactor behind the Reaper or a Marine in a reactor, especially if they're going Hellion. So you want to march across the map, test the wall in, and do stuff like this. Just snipe the mule. So here, I have 4 Lings, and the weird thing about Terran is if they want to come down the ramp to defend, they're in this weird spot where the Lings are going to be faster than their units that aren't Hellions. So they're in this spot where they want to come down to defend their natural, but they also are relying on building wall in to defend if they just have 2 Marines. If they have 4 Marines, they will be able to hold this many Lings. A mule is worth about 5 SCVs. Especially the first couple mules are extraordinarily important for Terran, because that mineral spike that they get, they really need to churn out their initial units. So here I thought there were 2 Marines. There were actually 2 more up on this high ground. If I had known that, I would have just stuck to the low ground and been obnoxious. Whenever you're doing early game Ling pressure as Zerg, especially if it's predicated on them losing the Reaper, your priority should always be to keep the Lings alive and just do high percentage harassment, which means you want to sit down here and kill SCVs that you know, like that mule that I killed at the beginning. I knew there was no way in hell he was going to be able to save that mule because he didn't have units down here, or a bunker or a wall. So that was high percentage harass. I thought I could be cute, kill 2 Marines, and maybe do tremendous damage, because if there's just 2 Marines, either A, I kill the 2 Marines and I either get in the base and then it's just like disgustingly bad for Terran, or I start to kind of damage the wall, force him to pull workers, and then run to the natural, which is just an insane amount of lost economy. But as it stands, this guy was not going for a Hellion opener. He was actually going for the 2-1-1, which is, you know, the standard stem drop build that the Terran players love to do these days. So I make my first mistake of the game, and I trade 4 Lings for 4 Marines. Now, price-wise, you might be saying, well, that's not that bad. 100 minerals for 50, as we see a bunker go down. Well, you have to consider that what could those 4 Lings have done for me? They could have provided a tremendous amount of pressure and map control. Had I parked them down here, I could have been a prick to his SCVs, or more realistically, I could have left one here, one here, one here, and had eyes on all of his third bases and his move-out paths. So that's what happens if you try to get greedy and just say, oh, I want to end the game. You very rarely want to do moves like that where you get impatient and try to end the game. As Zerg, it's almost always better to favor a drone approach where you use the attacking units you made to maintain map control and scouting and get ahead economy-wise. So I'm going to briefly pause again. What have I done at home? I have 3 queens. That means one of my queens will be able to creep spread, and if I make another queen, which I am, when my third base finishes, I will immediately be able to inject, which the way that the 2-1-1 drop build times out, you really want to have that third base inject, because the drop a lot of times will land around the time where your third finishes, and you really need that extra little amount of production that comes from having the injects on the third. By the way, it's worth pointing out, 2-on-1 is the 2 barracks, 1 factory, 1 starport, where they swap a with reactor. Essentially, this build in a nutshell: 2 Marines, 16 Marines, 2 medevacs, and stim. Almost everyone knows about it. Since this is a video targeted for new players, I just thought I would touch on that. Now, the reason I bring this up, really, is because there are so many variations of 2-on-1. You got 2-on-1 with 14 Marines in a mine. You got 2-on-1 with 4 Hellbats. You got 2-on-1 with a couple Hellions. You got 2-on-1 with sometimes people throwing a Marauder just to make it hard to micro Banes. So there are a million different variations for this build, so it's not really fair for me to say this build hits exactly at like X time. In general, I would say like 445 to 530 is when you need to be careful. That means as Zerg, since you're going Ling-based defense almost always, and that's what this video is about, Ling into Lurker, and delayed gas, notice I have 1 gas, that means that with Ling-based defense, it's very larva intensive, and without a macro hatch, that means that you're going to have to preemptively know when his attacking units are coming, and therefore make a bunch of units, even a minute before the build happens. So what does that mean if you're a new player and saying like, well, I don't really understand VenomousStare? This is what I mean. I have to scout my Terran, and if I scout him and he's doing this 2-on-1 fast stem drop build, that means that I have to start making units before the drops move out, because if I wait until I see the 2 medevacs like right here to start making units, it's too late. The way that Zerglings work is they're very larva intensive. With Zerg defense, a lot of times the unit, it's not really like the units themselves with their attack and defense that makes them weak. It's how you have to produce them in a macro sense. What do I mean? Another great question I'm sure a lot of new players are asking. Because Zerglings are so cheap, they're what you call larva expensive units. That just means that you have to have a lot of larvae to make them. If I want to make a big swell of Lings to defend a drop and I just have 2 hatcheries and a third one with no queen, I'm not really going to be able to make a ton of Zerglings, a big swell of units. That's why you see a macro hatch, which is just an additional hatchery usually placed in your main for larva with Ling styles, because they're very larva intensive. Another example of how Zerg units kind of have drawbacks that aren't really dependent on how the units themselves interact are roaches. Roaches are 2 supply, which if you look at the roach, 2 supply is quite a bit. Back in the Wings of Liberty beta they were a supply and a half, which is kind of weird to think about. Or perhaps it was, I think it was 1 supply actually now that I think on it. But regardless, the Wings of Liberty beta is 7 years ago. I just like to throw in some anecdotes. So how do we defend the drop build? First of all, it is worth noting that with my first 100 gas, Ling speed. With my next 100 gas, overlord speed. I like to get quick overlord speed in every non-mirror matchup, so versus Protoss and versus Terran, because I find that being able to scout quickly and efficiently is oftentimes the difference between me winning and losing games. New players are very guilty of forgetting to scout because a lot of times with Zerg it's like, oh, at 4:30 I have to intuitively remember to scout, and here's what I'm doing at around 4:30, send in the OVN, and what do I see? 2-1-1. If you see two barracks, one with tech lab, one with reactor, and one of the tech labs is researching, very, very, very indicative of 2-1-1. And if you see the starport with the reactor, that's a dead giveaway. It is impossible for Terran to just normally build a reactor this quickly. What I mean by that is they have to do the factory reactor, and then as the starport's building, and then do swapperoo. So the Terran player is never going to do a swapperoo unless they're doing a drop build.
SCV ready.
As you can see here, he's going into tech lab, and he wants to get tanks. So if you don't understand what I mean, is if the Terran wasn't doing a fast drop build here, he would have just made a tech lab on the first factory and went right into tanks. And this is a really common thing where the drop build kind of times out weird, where there's only 14 Marines. Super, super common. You have to have really crisp pro gamer macro to hit that 16 Marines every time. Part of the reason why people do the one mine variation of this build, which is incredibly powerful, because believe it or not, one mine versus a link-based defense is very hard to hold off. So I'm going to have to pause again since this is a video targeted towards new players. A few things to note of our Terran player: he hasn't gone for what I like to call an aggressive wall, he's gone for more of a subtle wall, which is essentially, as Terran or Protoss, you use your base that collects minerals, so Nexus or Orbital Command Center or Planetary or Command Center, as part of your wall. So as opposed to walling here with like a couple depots and a racks, especially if you're being pressured early, it can feel like, well shit, I can't really build a wall all the way out here, as Donald Trump is feeling right now, trying to fight Congress. So what you do is you use your base as part of the wall, and you go depot against the wall, usually bunker in the middle, and then another depot, and then this area is kind of walled, and Zerg can't do any inside action. And then when it's earlier on in the game, like 2 minutes earlier, if they want to do worker harass, they have to go all the way around, and oftentimes they have to circumvent bunker fire, and you can just retreat the units out of the bunker and kill the stuff really easily. And after you get this initial first part of your wall in, you get the last few depots over here, and suddenly the Zerg really has to encroach up into your base if he wants to fight. This means if you have tanks or elect to build more bunkers or just have your stuff rallied out here, it's the difference between Zerg getting absolutely shelled from this high ground by tanks, which of course this guy is going, or Zerg being able to fight way, way out here against your puny little wall-in, and then they get to march into your natural against no wall-in, and tanks suddenly become way less effective when Zerg can just very easily sit way up here with no impunity. So what have I done as Zerg? After I got my overlord speed, I went ahead and got a macro hatch since I'm going for ling-based defense, and if you take a bad hit, like bad tank splash, sloppy micro, bad Widowmine hit, and you don't have a macro hatch, sometimes you just lose. So I like to always do my macro hatch directly next to my main hatch. This way I hit my camera hotkey, box my queen, hit V, hold shift, and just click, click, and the queen will inject both hatches. I made quite a few drones here because if you are very greedy and make a lot of drones and you don't waste minerals, what the motherfuck? And you don't waste minerals on drones, or excuse me, that like I thought I was gonna have to redo the whole video and it really pissed me off for a second. If you don't waste minerals on early lings for defense, and you just make a lot of drones, which we see I have quite a few drones, I'm not like insanely ahead or anything, but if you make an adequate amount of drones, it means that while your third base is building, you're going to be in a situation where you have like 36 workers, which if you have 1 or 2 gas geysers is enough. And if you're going a ling-based style, it feels you're going to have, if you played the game long enough to have correct instincts, you're going to feel the need to make a bunch of drones, even though it'll oversaturate. You can kind of give into that a little bit. Like I probably made 5 or 6 extra drones. This allowed me to take an extra gas, make a nice spore, which by the way, this spore is a great spot against 2-1-1 because players love to just come in from the south side and drop. and they really love to hide behind this dead space. So this spore is kind of the best of both worlds. And of course with the macro hatch almost done, I have a lot of units. So you want to resist the urge to just say, I'm going to make 6 drones, too many for my natural like I did, and then I'm going to make a bunch of blind drones here to just like, as soon as this third finishes, I'm going to have 6, 7, 8 drones rolling out. Be real tempting to do that, especially if you're a good Zerg player who's gotten in the habit of always wanting to make drones. 211 is going to hit you from about 430 to 530 depending on your league and the variation. And like I said, you have to start preemptively making preemptively making attacking units. So here we see, because of my delayed gas style, I don't really have an upgrade going. That's a small mistake. Also, check out my overlord spread. Overlord at both of his thirds. Overlord on this high ground after I had scouted his natural. Overlord out here kind of in this dead space to scout. Overlord at his fourth. And if we look at my vision, I kind of have a nice little read on almost every airspace coming out of his base. Now once you get this sort of basic outline on a Terran's base where both thirds are covered, which is probably the most important thing, you got to scout Overlord because you do want to continue to scout throughout the game in case they try to go like into air or something weird. Like, I'm not talking about BC, I'm talking about like maybe multiple starport Liberator. And then this one right here, see this high ground Zerg players? There are little high grounds all over maps in StarCraft 2 where you can hide overlords. These are intentionally made for Zerg players to hide overlords on. Now once Terran gets medevacs and peeks over them, they can see them, but it's still way better than just leaving them out. Like, these are little high grounds too, so look for those Zerg players. If you're a Zerg and if you're bronze between gold and you're saying, well, I don't know where to put my overlords, so I just put them at the back of my base. Terrible. As Zerg, we have a huge advantage in terms of overlords and our supply being able to scout around for us. So find high grounds on maps, park your overlords there, and I like to send my first overlord to the natural, my second one to the main to scout, my third one either out here to scout or at one of his thirds, and then the fourth or fifth one at one of his thirds. And then from there, you can't really go wrong with putting them over bases or putting them kind of up here to scout for drops. Now the new player might be saying, well, what if he goes Viking? What if I start to lose? The new player, and even shit like Diamond and below, I would say, maybe not Diamond, but if you're below 4,000 MMR, you're probably going to find it difficult to pull back every single overlord you have out on the map if he's going Viking, or if you're playing Protoss against Protoss and he's going Phoenix. You might find it hard to find every overlord and pull it back. Now there are two things I need to note about this. Yes, it is kind of difficult at first, but the vision you get is worth it. So how do you recall all those overlords? Don't scroll around like this and try to find them, especially if your sensitivity isn't up high like mine. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to look with your eyes down in the bottom left of your mini-map, and you're going to look for these red dots all over the map. Let's just say for the sake of the argument, after reactored starport he went double Viking. No one really does that, but let's just say for the most extreme example, double Viking, and he's really intelligent and splits them up to hunt for OVs, as we see him adding more racks and a third standard stuff. So here's what you do as Zerg. You look with your eyeballs on your mini-map. You see all of the big red dots that represent overlords. You hold shift the entire time. You left click your mini-map where your mouse is literally right on top of the red dot. See how my mouse is right on top of the red dot? I'm not just sloppily clicking near the red dot and then having to scroll to find the overlord. I'm clicking on the red dots like they're chicken pox. And notice how I'm zoomed out, so if I go to normal zoom it'll be even better. But notice how those overlords are within reason. They're in like the middle part of my screen, as opposed to like these two quadrants or above or below. So you click each spot and then you hold shift and you click box. And the benefit of clicking accurately is I know I'm getting really in depth here, but the benefit of clicking accurately is your eyes can stay focused on the mini-map, and you just muscle memory go to about midpoint box, and then as you're dragging back down, go back to the mini map. And then like if you're really good, you're clicking like this, which is kind of like, I guess double picking would be like a good analogy, like if you play guitar. And then it come back down, boom. So the idea is like mini map, click. I'm not even gonna get into like the absolute optimal way to click it. I'm just gonna give you the new player approach. New player, you click right on those red dots, you hold shift, you don't even have to look at your screen. You can just make big boxes, even if you're not very good at the game. Big boxes. And notice how quick I did that, and then you just click to your natural where you have like a spore and right click and all your obies will run back. Now the most important thing about this is, remember, we got overlord speed with gas 100 to 200, and that's so important. Because that means we can afford to be very liberal with our overlords and get a ton of scouting info, but if they do go Viking, we're fine anyway. Because we have overlord speed and they can run home. Even if the guy goes fucking double Viking, we're not going to lose 8 overlords and be supply blocked. So let's talk about my creep spread. With Zerg creep, you always want to have overlords kind of extending out like little tendrils. By the way, this is not going to be a double video, this is just going to be the one replay. So it's real important to have creep going southbound and then kind of towards the middle of the map. And you always want to have creep going towards your third. So if we pause one more time, I have 21 lings and no banes and no bane speed. It's just important here to always bring your creep queen and your queen the queen that is by your base, that is closest, and then have them focus fire on medevac, assuming you have enough ling bane. If you got caught off guard by the dropper, you took a big mine hit, you might want to just A-move the queens. If you need every little bit of damage, but in general, you just want to A-move your ling bane and then have your queens on, have like your queen selected, and then have A-move or right click them on a medevac. And you can even shift click them onto the other. So here the crux of the issue is bane speed. And essentially once this little drop gets stifled, I can really go into drones hard. You always want to, it's real easy for good Terran players to do this build. Drop unit, stem, shave off army, and pick up. You don't want to let this happen as Zerg. You always want to have your queens in position to defend. And when they do attack, you want to have your army attacking. Now bane speed finished, and my macro was good enough to have enough units to defend that drop. But if you're lower league and everything is a little bit sloppier, which is kind of the way StarCraft works, usually there's not like one definitive thing that gold leaguers do way worse than diamond leaguers, other than macro, which of course can mean like 50 different things, whether it be splitting, creep spreading, injecting, or I guess splitting wouldn't be one, but creep spreading, injecting, making macro hatches, not getting supply block, making static defense, scouting, making the correct upgrades, making the correct buildings. All that shit goes into macro. So if you're silver or gold and you get to like 6 minutes in the game and you have significantly less stuff than me, that's just part of playing the game more and getting better at the game. But the point is if you did have less stuff, the Terran would be able to abuse you more and shave off your lings and banes, pick up, and then just keep coming back harassing you and make it where you're always having to build ling bane when you want to be making drones. Okay, so here is a huge turning point of the game. Since I killed about half of his marines in the drop, and I have vision of both of his third bases, this drop and this harassment has been pretty much stifled. And if we look at my creep spread, it's not great because he did clean up a little bit over here, but it's not bad. So I'm going into Hydra, and this is another big mistake, along with attacking with the lings up here, is my second queen was too far behind to threaten the medevacs and didn't have transfuse energy. So because the Terran player is always able to pick up and run away, in order to defend this build you're going to need to have queens, because if you just have ling bane, a good Terran player is just going to drop in annoying locations and push your shit in over and over. So this is a technique that really is very difficult to deal with at lower leagues, which is multi-prong harass. Now granted, this is just one drop ship or medevac filled with Marines, and then a main army, which that's very normal. If you're Terran, that shit is very easy to do. Just have one fucking medevac out on the map. It doesn't even have to be doing important micro-based stuff, just have it clear creep. And have your other army out on the map. As Terran, you never want to have all your shit in one spot. You always want to have something in a medevac, you always want to be threatening harassment, you always want to be forcing the Zerg to multitask. And this is what I mean. There's no risk here for the Terran until I get Hydras out, because really it's just Ling Bane. So what he can do is drop, scan, clear creep, which is really annoying and really useful for him, and then just do whatever the hell he wants with his main army, because he knows I'm not going to have anti-air over here, so he can just pick up with impunity. Really the most anti-air he's going to run into is a creep queen, which is free pickings. So it's very common for Terran players, if they get caught up microing, to let their macro slip, and that's what happened here. If this guy had been more diligent about producing out of both of his barracks, he should have had more stuff. Now it's very easy for some dipshit on Reddit or some mongoloid who doesn't even touch the game to just say, oh well, this guy's bad, and just make a very linear sort of A and B assessment about someone's skill level, and then even more idiotically say that, well, this guide and this commentary doesn't really have merit, because this player made this one mistake with his macro, and therefore he's just shit and there's nothing to be learned. Now there's a reason why you see comments like this so frequently on Reddit and on other websites where people don't fucking play the game. It's because they don't know what they're talking about. So the reason that that's stupid is, yes, that this guy did make a mistake with his macro. With his 5 racks, he should have been more diligent about producing. Now this is an extraordinarily common mistake, especially at lower levels, which is what I like to nickname playing the MOBA game. Now a MOBA game like League of Legends, you got one character and you're sitting there the whole game just microing that one little guy till the cows come home, and people love that shit. When I say people, I mean 13-year-olds that aren't good enough to take accountability for their actions and play 1v1 games. Ooh, Jimmy's rustled yet? I hope so. So this means that if you make a mistake in a 1v1 game, you're the one that's held accountable. You're not able to say my jungler was shit, my healer was shit, it's you. And in this game, this guy did what's called playing a MOBA game, which is getting way too focused on microing and really just, oh, I'm gonna micro, I have to drop, I have to attack, and I have to scan. When in reality, StarCraft 2, it's more of a balance. You want to attack, you want to put pressure on your opponent, you want to scout, but you want to macro, probably most important of all. And if we go to income here, I've solidified a solid advantage with 66 workers, and my Terran opponent has briefly allowed an eclipse in his production to start. Now this is important because Terran, from about the mid game on, wants to just be in Zerg's face all the damn time. Now the issue here is that, like many players, this guy is prioritizing his micro over his macro. So what he's doing is dropping, trying not to lose this medevac, pushing, trying to get this tanks in position, when in reality what he should have done was drop, scan, clear creep, then hit 5, then, well, like my hotkeys are 5, 6, 7, should have hit all of his production hotkeys, rallied him out here, and done his quick little muscle memory of barracks hotkey, hold down A, factory hotkey, make a tank, starport hotkey, make 2 medevacs, maybe 4, you know, if you don't feel like you're that good at macro. Instead, he did what I like to call playing a MOBA game, which is just being way too focused on microing. Now it is worth noting that the reason that this guy's macro slipped wasn't just like, oh, he's bad, as Reddit would say. It's because I've got overlords blocking both of his thirds. Now whenever you creep block someone's third, it's not just good because it delays the income, which is very obvious and important. It's good because Terran players really have builds mapped out to say, pressure Zerg off of 2 base, and then when I take my third, I'll drop a shitload of mules and make that extra production that I really need to wear Zerg down. If you can delay this power spike by 2 minutes, it means that the Terran push is severely gutted. So here we see the Terran player dicking around, trying to take a third where he can't. This means that his macro is affected. And this is the difference between leaving comments on forums like a dipshit and never playing the, like negative, hateful comments like a dipshit on forums and never playing the game, and playing the game and realizing that doing aggressive moves and things like this can force players to make mistakes. The average Twitch chat shitter or Reddit moron will simply say, the Terran player is bad and made a mistake because of his lapse in production. When almost always in StarCraft and in real-time strategy games, at least at a 4K MMR and above, mistakes are caused by someone doing something. And in this instance, this mistake is partly predicated on this third base being delayed. This normal third base was choked out. This one was too. And this means that normally when he wants to get his crapload of depots and racks up here, he's not going to. It's going to be delayed. So it's more than just, oh, he should have made more depots in his main and more barracks in his main. Because at the end of the day, all of that, like the barracks 6 through 10 and the depots like 110, 109 supply and on, a lot of that stuff gets made at the third and or is predicated on third base income. So let's see what happens here. Notice that I remember that tanks are back here and tanks are a really big deal. So I run forward with my Ling army and focus the tanks. And then I grabbed all of my Banes and ran backwards to take care of the Marines. Now this guy is harassing and being annoying and clearing up creep spread. And this is what you want to do as Terran. You always want to push the envelope and be obnoxious. Now as Zerg here, I've lost all my Banelings and I'm not going to be able to defend my fourth. This is something that can happen if you're not careful, where you use all of your Banes to hold off one attack, and then before you know it, Terran is up your ass again with something you have to have Banes to defend. This is most common with drops. Say you hold off one big attack that was his main army, and then a drop flies into your natural, and he positions well, and suddenly you lose a crap load of Lings. That's part of why dropping is so good as Terran. And right here we see, even though I got Hydras out and had a Creep Queen behind him, he was able to escape with the medevac and run in with multi-prong harass. And this is the advantage of multi-prong harass, is the Zerg player moves out on the map to try to pressure, and with just, really, this is what, like this is reality, just over one medevac's worth of units. Wow, that's really obnoxious. That's all you need, 6 Marines and a Marauder, and suddenly he's done a ton of damage. He's killed 20 workers. If we go to units, I'm way down in workers, and all it took was him killing creep spread to slow down my defensive ability. Notice that he killed creep here and here, so I didn't have the vision. Keep in mind, guys, creep is extraordinarily important as Zerg because so much of Zerg's defense is predicated on vision. Notice this third base hasn't even gotten alive and kicking. The Terran has more workers than me. Before he had way more. And guess what? He's not ahead in income. That's because this third was severely delayed, and that means that barracks 6 through 10 are delayed. So what have I done behind this? I've gotten Bane speed. I've tried to start getting upgrades, although I've been a little sloppy because I've lost so many workers, and I'm going into Lurker. I find that teching into Hive gives Terran too much of an opportunity to get a really powerful, disgusting Terran army, Liberators and Ghosts and all this nonsense, and since Zerg is pretty much going Hydra Ling Bane in the mid-game anyway, instead of using that gas to tech into Hive and Infester, what do? We make Lurker. So let's look at our Terran opponent.
Gangway, coming.
Now, because I had this Overlord over here at his fourth, he hasn't really been able to take control of that part of the map ever throughout the game. Sort of pressed out here with Bio, but you have to remember, when you Overlord block bases, probably the most important thing to remember is that anytime they move out to take it, you're gonna know. Anytime they try to bring units out to try to clear the Overlord, you're going to know. And the vision and the knowing is just as important as the blocking the expo. So notice that he's cleared this out and he kind of thinks, okay, well, I've taken control of that map, or I've taken control of this area and I killed the rocks. Now I'm going to push. Now this is something that is, like I said, is incredibly important. Creep spread. Right here at 10:35 in the game, I'm waiting on Lurkers, and being able to push through these rocks and get up in his base is going to be what determines whether I win or lose the game. The fact that I have pushed creep spread and within one screen length of his third base is the difference between this player pushing in and doing severe damage and doing what he does now. Let's just look at his vision. What does he see? Creep is all the way out here, and this is scary. He doesn't have any vision of my army. He doesn't know where the hell it is. There could be 80 supply of Ling Bane right here for all he knows. So he kind of has to tentatively pussyfoot around with a handful of Marines and push out and clear the creep. And this is the correct move. I'm not saying that pussyfooting around was the incorrect move. I'm saying that he had to do it because of the creep.
Our SCVs are under
So look
attack.
at this. We're 3 scans in and he's still pressing forward saying, okay, I'm clearing creep. Where is his army? And look at this. His main army is way back here and he wants to really be being aggressive. So remember, that creep clearing started at about 10:30 and it's past 11, just past 11, and I've broken through the rocks and surprised him. Now, if there was no creep, like if I just hadn't started respreading this creep southbound, then he could have pushed all the way up and been right here with tanks at 11. This is why creep spread is important, because you have to respect it. And this is kind of why lurker pushes are good. So the key to lurkers is positioning. Now lurkers are often considered a bad attacking unit, but if you can get into critical, especially high ground positioning with lurkers, you're really going to cause problems for Terran. So when you run in lurkers, one of the best things you can do is just click 1 and burrow it. And then, of course, once you find the spot where you want to do your whole army, you bury it. So what has the Terran done? He has a handful of units shutting out this base, but my creep spread, I'm going to rewind it a little. My creep spread back at the 10:30 mark let me know what he was doing. So at 10:30 he starts to push out. I see this. My army is right here and I have vision of this base. I make lurkers and say to myself, if he pushes out, I can easily base trade because he doesn't have vision of me and I have so much creep where I'm going to see where he's going. The only creep nitpick probably should have been like a couple tumors here, and if I was really good, a few going out here, which I had, but I just didn't allocate properly. So the crux of the issue is the Terran will attack. It will take a long time because of creep spread. He's going to get to about your side of the map, and then you're going to get in a position where he either brings back everything or he loses. Now this can be really tricky because if it's just a little bit late, if your creep spread's a little sloppy, or if you get supply blocked or anything, the Terran can get to here with tanks, and suddenly you're in a situation where the Terran can lift his buildings and it's like a full-blown base trade against Terran, which you never want to get into. What you do want to get into is a scenario where he gets everything committed 80% of the way up into the map, and you get in a position yourself with your army where if he doesn't react immediately, he dies. So let's watch the Terran's vision. Now he's just now starting to push up with his little poultry force. Now luckily for me, luckily for him, he hadn't moved all of this shit up like I was hoping he was. But because I saw it move out and I saw him pressure, I do kind of know that his stuff is at least right here. But the point is I can get lurkers set up. There's that one lurker.
Base is under attack.
Then of course you want to breach up into the main base. So the key with lurkers is once you burrow them, you want people to fight into you. You don't ever want to be in a position where you have a bunch of lurkers in a field of death and everything is sort of fighting off of range. Another key to lurkers is once they finally commit, a lot of times with the big army that can actually kill your lurkers, you want to move command all your banelings behind them. So let's see how I do here. Notice that I have so many lurkers set up in a critical spot where he has to come back. If he doesn't come back to fight this, I just keep leapfrogging them and devastate his whole man in natural. He absolutely has to come back and try to defend this, so I'm going to turn it to slow-mo. Let's see what happens. So this is what you have to do as Terran. Whenever you see lurkers, you either have to choose to fight or back off. Lurkers are so good defensively, usually that choice is to back off. However, whenever you position your lurkers in their base, they're forced to fight. This, a lot of the times, for an impatient Terran especially, means that you stem all your shit in and go. Now, sometimes if you don't have a ton of lurkers, Terran can get away with this with medevacs, upgrades, and a lot of supply. But with Banes, there's no running in. And that's what happens here. He tries to run in, but the banelings I throw at him are just enough. And the lurkers here just do tremendous damage. I mean, once you start to lose production like this, there's no coming back. If we look at units, he's pretty much destitute. And all you have to do is just leapfrog a handful of lurkers forward and let them sit within the cover of the other lurkers. And not let them get tanks up. Notice he was going for mine tank instead of double tank. So he says, that was unexpected, GG. And this was a guy who basically harassed throughout the entire game and had a lot of tempo going for him. So some things to note with lurker play. You do need to get overlord speed early with this style to scout. Notice that I was planning on going into hive at some point too. You really want to focus on creep spread, go to overlord spread. Holding 2-1-1 with lots of preemptive unit production. And then once you get the money lurkers, you always want to siege them in a position where the Terran is forced to attack into you. Now, if I wanted to be super cute here at the end, obviously it didn't really matter. But I probably should have had like one lurker burrowed on this little corner to fuck with the third. Anyway, if you enjoyed that, follow my stream and subscribe to the YouTube.